outbreeding devices is one of the very important concept in among plants in the chapter of sexual reproduction in flowering plant. Now, what is this outbreeding device? See, I told you there are two types of pollination. One is self-pollination. One is self-pollination and second one is cross-pollination. Self-pollination is the process wherein pollination takes place within the same flower. In cross-pollination, pollination takes place from one flower to another flower, between two different flowers. Maybe in the same plant or maybe in the different plant. Plants prefer cross-pollination. This we have to remember. Plants prefer cross-pollination. Okay. Why? Because why the plant prefers cross-pollination? Because self-pollination leads to inbreeding depression. Inbreeding depression. It leads to inbreeding depression. What is inbreeding depression? Inbreeding depression means due to continuous self-pollination at one stage they lose their fertility and productivity, and as a result, when they lose their fertility and productivity, automatically the quality goes down. So plants don't want to do that, so they want to go for cross-pollination. So what they do, in order to go for cross-pollination, they have some changes, some modification, some adaptation in them, and we call them as outbreeding devices. So how we can define now outbreeding devices? Outbreeding devices are the devices adapted by the flower to encourage cross-pollination and to discourage self-pollination. I repeat once again. Outbreeding devices are the devices adapted by the flower to encourage cross-pollination and to discourage self-pollination. Let us see, there are 3 or 4 outbreeding devices. The first device is very simple, unisexual flowers. Unisexual flower means what? Unisexual flower means flower contains either male reproductive structure or female, anyone. And when any one of them are present, then they must go for cross-pollination. Self-pollination is not at all possible. So they avoid self-pollination by producing unisexual flower. So this is one of the outbreeding devices. Second one, self-incompatibility. Now, what is the self-incompatibility? Suppose it's a bisexual flower. What is bisexual flower? If stamen and pistil, both of them are present in the same flower. So, self-incompatibility means if the pollen grain of the same flower falls on the stigma of that flower, pollen grain will not germinate at all. It goes waste. So, this technique is self-incompatibility. Okay, so it will not get germinated. Only if the pollen grains of another flower comes and fall on the stigma, it gets germinated. Thereby it promotes cross-pollination. Third one, variation in the position of pistil and stamen. So pistil and stamen are arranged in such a way, the position is such a way that the pollen grain of the same flower will not fall on the stigma. Maybe stigma height is much more when compared to height of the anther, so that the pollen grain will not fall there. So this is another technique. There is one more technique. It is fourth one, non-synchronization of pollen release pollen release and stigma receptivity. And stigma receptivity. What is the meaning of when pollen grains are released? Stigma is not ready, means the maturity period varies. Though the pollen grains are released, the female reproductive part is not ready, it's not matured, then though the pollen grain falls there, it's waste. So these are the various devices by which plant promote cross pollination and discourage self pollination. Now artificially we can carry out hybridization process in plant. We call it as artificial hybridization. We call it as artificial hybridization. We call it as artificial hybridization. What is this artificial hybridization? In artificial hybridization, what we do? There are two steps. First step is called as emasculation. And second step is called as bagging. What is emasculation? Now, in the flower, there will be stamen. Okay, there will be stamen. And the pollen grain should not fall on that stigma. We want the pollen grains of another plant of good quality should come and fall here. So for that first step, what we have to do? We have to remove the stamen present here. Okay, just cut those stamens or the anther from the flower, or you remove that. That is called as emasculation. Removal of male reproductive part from the flower. Generally, stamens are cut. Okay, it is removed. That is called as emasculation. By this, you have avoided the fall of pollen grain of that flower on the stigma. Point number one. Now, the pollen grain of any flower should not come and fall there. So what you have to do? You have to cover that flower with a bag of butter paper or polythene bag or polythene paper. With that, you cover that flower, so that the pollen grain of any N number or any X plant should not come and fall there. So you have covered it. Now what we can do? Now we can collect the pollen grain of the required plant and you make it to fall on the stigma by removing that cover, that bag, or we call dusting of pollen grain. And again you bag it. Again you bag it. This is what we call artificial hybridization. By this we can get required quality of that particular plant in the next generation. I repeat once again, the flower is there. It's a bisexual flower. First step, the pollen grain of that flower should not fall on the stigma. So you cut all the stamen with the help of scissor, or you remove it with the help of forceps. Now cover it with polythene or the butter paper, so that the pollen grain of some other flower should not fall there. Now collect the pollen grain of required or the desired plant, open up the bag and you just place it on those stigma and you again cover it. So this is what we call artificial hybridization.